week class, we're talking about how growth impacts both the developed and developing world. Growth does impact both worlds, but in different manners. We're both are kind of looking at one outcome or one major concern. According to this week's reading lesson, chapter 6 of an introduction to global studies, we learn a little bit about what this problem is. The major concern is how many people can the world sustain? And this isn't a question that can be easily answered by giving a number by saying this X amount of people is how many the world can sustain and we can live off that, until whatever year. It's a lot more complicated than that because we have two different worlds and it's kind of hard to judge what's going to happen in the end. Um, so both the developed and the developing world consume the Earth's resources, but in different ways. And there's kind of a pattern from going to a developing world to a developed world. This pattern starts off, according to Lesson 5 PowerPoint that we did this week. Stage 1 is high birth rates, high death rates. So in these developing countries, you have these high death rates. The older generation is dying off a lot quicker, so they have a lot more children, so they have somebody to take care of them when they get older. They have a lot of children to help grow crops, to help do all the family labor and do everything that needs to be done to sustain that kind of living style or to help them live. And that's the way it starts. In stage 2, the living conditions begin to improve. Food becomes more available to them. Healthcare coverage increases. They're able to get healthcare. Um, all these improvements decrease the death rate. So the death rate begins to go down, but there's still that pattern of, hey, I need somebody to take care of me, or that mindset for them, so they continue to have a lot of kids. And this continues until they start to really realize that the death rate is going down, and that takes a little while to happen. So in stage 3, contraception comes out, wage increases, all these things start to decrease the economic value of children. So once the economic value of these children go down, then the birth rates go down. Hey, we don't need children as badly. I don't need somebody to take care of me as badly as we used to, or my dad or grandfather did. So I don't need children as badly anymore. I don't need them to work on the farm, and they're not as valuable economically to me anymore. And then we go on to stage 4. There's low birth rates and low death rates. And this is kind of the pattern to getting into the developed world. Why is this important? Because this kind of gives us the idea of what it takes or where the changes occur, so we know how much a nation or a group of people are going to consume of the Earth's resources. And that's really what we want to find out, and that's really what the main concern is. And so in the developed world, again, according to the reading in chapter 6, an American, for example, will consume 32 times as many resources than a Kenyan will. So somebody living in Kenya will consume X amount of resources, and an American will do 32 times that. The reason for that being is just because we're in the developed world, and that's kind of our mindset, and that's our lifestyle. We don't have to worry about where's our next meal coming from. We don't have to go out and plant crops like we used to. We go to the grocery store. I'm more worried personally about my fantasy football team than planting crops, because I don't need to. I can go to the fridge, pull out some hot wings, put them in the oven, and watch the football game, and that's what's important to me on a Sunday. Other countries are not as fortunate. They're still developing. They have to work a lot harder than we do just to survive or just to make it by. We take a lot of things for granted because we lived in the developed worlds. Things are so much more developed, and that's why they call it the developed world. And that's our lifestyle. So with this comes waste. I leave lights on in my house. I throw away a lot of food that I don't want to eat. I just don't feel like eating it anymore. I'm not necessarily satisfied or full. I just don't want to eat it anymore. Or I eat too much and I am full and I have waste and I give it away. Where these other countries, they can't afford to do that. They need to eat everything they produce and produce enough for them to live and to survive. So there's a lot more waste, not just in food, but power, electricity, water consumption, all of the Earth's resources. I'm using 32 times as much as the average Kenyan. So you can look at it and say the developed nations are such as the United States, North America in general, or Europe, Australia, and Japan. These are the nations that are most harmful to the world and our resources because we're the ones consuming the most of it. But we also have to look at the developing nations. Yes, they use a lot fewer resources than we do in the developed nations, but they're going to go according to the pattern. They're going to start having improved living conditions. Food's going to become more available to them. The improved health care. All these things are going to lead to them having lower death rates. And then conditions are the elderly populations can continue to survive, and this is going to in turn develop their world a little bit more until they become part of the developed world. There's contraception, they have wage increases, until the economic value of children begins to decrease and they have lower birth rates, and they're at that position where they don't need children to survive. So there's somewhat of a balance going on where us as Americans or the developed world, we're not having as many children as the developing world because we don't need them as bad. So theoretically, we're not going to be consuming as much because we have fewer children in the future than the Kenyans are going to have. But unless we're having 32 times fewer children, we're still going to be consuming more. But what's going to happen is to these other nations, the developing world, is that they're going to become developed. And once they become developed, it's not just how many children are they having, it's how many people are living in that country at the point of development. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but eventually they're going to be using twice as many resources as they used to, and then 3 times, up until they get developed at our point, and they're using 32 times as many resources as they once were. And this is going to deteriorate the Earth's resources a lot faster once all these nations become developed. Now, is there going to be that balance where the entire world starts having so few of children that we're able to sustain a comfortable living style and we're not depleting all the Earth's resources? Nobody really knows. And that's the concern, and that's what all the hype is about, is what's going to happen in the future. How can we sustain this kind of living style, all these different go green type things going on, try and preserve the Earth's resources, because eventually we're going to run out. The rate at which that is going to happen is what is a mystery. And that's pretty much what's going on in the world as far as growth impacting both the developed and the developing worlds, kind of in different ways, but eventually what's going to happen in the future when the developing worlds become developed and follow this cycle, this pattern, and they join us in the developed world and we start burning through the Earth's resources a lot faster. That's my post on what I have to say in this week's forum about how growth impacts both the developed and developing world. Feel free to leave any comments, questions. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. And I appreciate you guys' time.